"You'll never make a living with that nonsense," my father said, dismissing my digital artwork with a wave of his hand at our weekly family dinner. Tomorrow morning, the Museum of Modern Art would announce my immersive installation as their centerpiece acquisition for $8.3 million. But tonight I was still just his impractical daughter who played with computer pictures instead of getting a real job. My name is Nora Lee, 34 years old, first-generation Chinese American, and according to Art Forum's latest issue, the most important digital artist of her generation. Not that anyone at this dinner table would know it. To them, I was the family disappointment who had abandoned a promising architecture career to pursue digital art, a decision that remained incomprehensible to my practical immigrant parents even after a decade of my quiet success. "How's the computer drawing going?" my mother asked, making a vague gesture meant to encompass my entire career while passing the dumplings. She always used that phrase, computer drawing, as if I were playing with MS Paint rather than creating complex, algorithmically generated installations that explored the intersection of technology, cultural memory, and human perception. "It's going well," I replied neutrally, taking a dumpling. The non-disclosure agreement with MoMA prohibited me from mentioning the acquisition until their public announcement. "I have a new installation completing soon." "Still no benefits, I assume," my father commented, not looking up from his food. "Your cousin David just made partner at his accounting firm. Full medical, dental, retirement plan." Across the table, my older brother Kevin smirked. As CFO of a successful tech company, he represented everything my parents valued: stability, conventional success, tangible achievements. "Maybe you could design a website for David's firm," he suggested. Make some actual money with those skills." What Kevin didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my digital art studio generated more annual revenue than his entire C-suite salary. My installations, which combined intricate algorithmic projections with physical structures that responded to human movement, had been acquired by major collections across 3 continents. Tech billionaires commissioned custom pieces for prices that would make my practical father faint. "I appreciate the suggestion," I said mildly, "but I'm fairly busy with existing projects." "Busy doesn't mean profitable," my father muttered. My mother shot him a look, then turned to me with forced brightness. "Any special someone in your life?" "Lou from church has a son about your age. Very successful. He's a dentist." "Mom, please," I sighed. "I'm focused on my work right now." "That's what worries us," she replied. "All work, no stability, no family." I didn't mention that I'd recently purchased a waterfront condominium in cash, or that I employed a staff of 12 at my studio. In my parents' worldview, success had clear metrics: a prestigious job title, marriage to an appropriate professional, and visible symbols of conventional achievement. My path fit none of these criteria. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe, my studio manager. "MoMA's press release is finalized. Announcement 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. The art world is about to explode." "You're not even listening," my mother chided, noticing my distraction. "Sorry," I said, tucking my phone away. "Work message." "Always with the phone," my father grumbled. When I was building my business, I was fully present with family. My father's business was a small accounting practice he built after immigrating, working punishing hours that meant he was rarely home when I was growing up. The irony of his comment wasn't lost on me, but I let it pass. Tomorrow would bring enough disruption to our family dynamic. After dinner, as I helped my mother clear the table, she spoke quietly. "Your father means well. He just wants security for you. Art is so unpredictable." "I know, Mom," I said, rinsing plates. "But I'm doing fine, really." She patted my arm. "He saved those architecture school brochures, in case you change your mind." I graduated from Cornell's architecture program 12 years ago, worked at a prestigious firm for 2 years, then left to pursue digital art when my early experiments gained unexpected attention. My parents had never forgiven what they saw as throwing away a real career for an incomprehensible hobby. "I'm not going back to architecture," I said gently. "Just keep an open mind," she insisted. "It's never too late to get back on track." On the drive home to my waterfront condo, a sleek, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, I thought about the concept of tracks and the narrow definitions of success that had shaped my family's expectations. Tomorrow's announcement would force them to confront a different kind of achievement, one they had never bothered to understand. The MoMA acquisition was for ancestral algorithms, my most personal work to date. The immersive installation used machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of family photographs, my own and those donated by immigrants from across the Chinese diaspora. As visitors moved through the space, their presence triggered shifting projections that explored how cultural memory evolves, fragments, and reconstitutes across generations. The work had emerged from my own complicated relationship with my heritage, the traditions my parents desperately preserved and that I had sometimes rejected in my youth, only to seek reconnection through my art as an adult. It was, in many ways, a visual conversation with my parents that we could never have in words. My phone buzzed again, another text from Zoe. Major profiles confirmed with NYT, New Yorker, and WSJ for next week. When are you telling your family? They'll find out with everyone else, I replied. Morning brought a flurry of activity as the announcement went live. MoMA Ekikwaris Jira Uindibiri Aking Digital Installation for RCORD $8.3 million headlined the art press. While mainstream media focused on the historic nature of the acquisition, the museum's largest ever purchase of a purely digital work, I watched the news ripple across my social media feeds, my email filling with congratulations from collectors, curators, and fellow artists. No messages from my family. I wasn't surprised. They rarely followed art news, and I doubted they would make the connection even if they glimpsed a headline. At 10:17 a.m., my phone rang. Kevin, my brother. Nora? His voice sounded strange. I just got out of a meeting and my assistant showed me something. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal about some artist named Nora Lee who sold something to MoMA for millions. That can't be you, right? The hesitation in his voice was almost comical. The impossibility of reconciling his computer drawing sister with a multi-million-dollar museum acquisition. Yes, that's me, I said simply. A long pause. $8 million? For digital art? 8.3 actually. It's an immersive installation called Ancestral Algorithms. It explores the evolution of cultural memory across generations of immigration. Another silence. Does Mom know? Dad? Not yet. Jesus, Nora. He sounded genuinely shocked. All this time, we thought you were, struggling? Wasting my time? Playing with computer pictures? Well, yeah, he admitted. Why didn't you tell us? This was the question I'd anticipated, the one I'd rehearsed answers for, yet now found difficult to articulate. Would you have understood? I asked finally. Would it have mattered if the validation didn't come in a form you recognized? Before he could answer, my other line beeped, my mother calling. I should take this, I told Kevin. It's Mom. I switched calls. Hi, Mom. Nora? Her voice was uncharacteristically tentative. Mrs. Zhang from church just called me. She said her daughter saw your name in the newspaper. Something about a museum buying your computer art for millions of dollars. Is this true? The disbelief in her voice was palpable. I closed my eyes, picturing her standing in her kitchen, phone clutched tightly, trying to make sense of information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about my life. Yes, Mom. The Museum of Modern Art has acquired my installation for their permanent collection. But so much money. How is this possible? How to explain the years of work, the evolution of my artistic practice, the growing recognition in a field she had never tried to understand? How to compress a decade of dedication into terms that would make sense within her framework of value? My work is important to people, Mom. It helps them see things in new ways. Silence, then a small sound I couldn't quite interpret. When she spoke again, her voice wavered. Your father and I, we always worried. I know, I said. But I'm okay. More than okay. You must come to dinner tonight, she said suddenly, her practical nature reasserting itself. I'll make your favorite dishes. Your father will want to hear everything. That evening, I arrived at my parents' modest home to find an atmosphere of stunned recalibration. My father, usually stoic and reserved, embraced me at the door, a rare physical demonstration that signaled the magnitude of the shift occurring in his understanding of my life. Inside, I found the dining table already set with my mother's best dishes. Kevin was there too, with his wife Julia, both regarding me with expressions that mingled bewilderment with a new species of respect. "The journal says you're the most important digital artist of your generation," Kevin said, as if testing the phrase for believability. "Some critics say that," I replied, accepting the tea my mother pressed into my hands. "But how does it work?" my father asked, his practical mind struggling to grasp the fundamentals. "What exactly did the museum buy? Can't anyone just copy digital things?" I spent the next hour explaining the nature of my work, the proprietary algorithms, the physical installation components, the certificate of authenticity, the rights and responsibilities that came with the acquisition. My family listened with an intensity they had never before directed at my art, asking questions that revealed both their confusion and their belated desire to understand. "And all this time," my mother said, her voice trailing off, "all this time, I've been building something I finished for her. Something valuable, even if it wasn't visible to you." My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout dinner, finally spoke. "I still don't understand this art," he admitted. "But I understand that others see its value. Important people. So perhaps I've been limited in my thinking." From my father, this qualified acknowledgement was monumental, perhaps the closest he could come to an apology for years of dismissal. After dinner, he disappeared briefly into his study, returning with a folded newspaper clipping. "I saved this," he said, passing it to me. It was a small review of my first gallery show from nearly a decade ago. A show I hadn't even known he was aware of. The critic had been kind, noting my promising exploration of cultural dislocation through digital means. I stared at the yellowed clipping, then at my father. "You kept this, all this time?" He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I didn't understand it, but it had your name, so I kept it." In that moment, I glimpsed the complexity beneath his practical exterior. The immigrant father who prioritized security and conventional success because he had known their absence, yet who had quietly preserved evidence of his daughter's divergent path. "The museum," he said haltingly, "they will display your name. People will know it was made by Nora Lee." I nodded, suddenly understanding the question behind his question. The importance of recognition, of leaving a mark that others would see. "Yes, Dad, my name will be there." He nodded once, satisfaction and something like pride briefly crossing his features. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, my mother pressed a container of leftovers into my hands. "We didn't know," she said quietly. "All these years we thought we were trying to help you find your way. We didn't see you had already found it." "It's okay, Mom," I said, though we both knew it wasn't entirely okay, that the years of dismissal had left marks that one night's recognition couldn't erase. "Will you show us?" she asked suddenly. "Your installation at the museum. When it's ready. Will you explain it to us?" The request surprised me, not just the interest in seeing my work, but the acknowledgement that it might require explanation, that they might need to learn how to see it. "I like that," I said. 3 months later, I stood with my family in a private viewing of Ancestral Algorithms before its public opening at MoMA. They moved slowly through the space I had created, watching as the projections responded to their movements as fragments of immigrant family photographs, including our own, coalesced and dispersed in patterns determined by my algorithms. My father paused before a sequence that incorporated his own journey, old documents, departure and arrival dates, the address of his first apartment in America transformed into flowing visual data. His hand reached out, triggering a cascade of new images that traced connections between his story and those of countless others who had made similar journeys. "This is us," he said quietly, "our history." Yes, I agreed. It's about memory and transformation, how we carry our past with us, even when it becomes invisible. He nodded slowly, watching the patterns shift and evolve. "Not invisible," he corrected. "Just. I didn't know how to see it before." My mother, who had been circling the installation with growing emotion, joined us. "It's beautiful, Nora," she said, taking my hand. "I never imagined computers could make something so human." The curator approached, informing us that members of the press had arrived for the media preview. As I prepared to address them, my father touched my arm. "We were wrong," he said simply, the words clearly difficult for him. "About your path, about what has value." It wasn't a full accounting of our complicated history, nor did it erase the years of dismissal. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that some forms of success can't be measured in conventional terms, that some journeys don't follow predictable tracks. As I described my installation to the assembled journalists, I caught sight of my family standing at the periphery, seeing me in my professional element for the first time, watching as curators and critics engaged with my ideas, as my name was spoken with respect in this temple of cultural value. Later, at dinner, my mother asked questions about my next projects, my father inquired about the business structure of my studio, and Kevin, still clearly recalibrating his understanding of his little sister, mentioned a tech CEO friend who was interested in commissioning work. "I'm proud of you," my mother said unexpectedly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Not because of the money or the museum, but because you saw something valuable that the rest of us couldn't see, and you had the courage to follow it." My father nodded in agreement, a gesture that contained both acknowledgement of past misjudgment and newfound respect. As I drove home that night, I thought about the nature of validation, how we seek it from those closest to us, yet sometimes must find it elsewhere when their vision is too constrained by their own experiences and fears. I thought about my installation, with its exploration of how cultural memory evolves across generations, and realized that my family and I were living that very process, negotiating new understandings of value, success, and recognition. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dad looking at your website, trying to understand. Patient with him." I smiled, imagining my practical father scrolling through documentation of my work, attempting to bridge the gap between his world and mine. Not because an institution had validated my choices with a multimillion-dollar acquisition, though that had forced open the door, but because he was finally ready to see that valuable things can exist outside the frameworks we inherit, that sometimes the most important journeys lead away from the familiar paths toward territories only a few can initially recognize. My art had always been about making visible the connections and patterns that exist beneath the surface of our lives. Perhaps that work was beginning at home too, revealing threads of understanding that had always been present but never before acknowledged, connections as real and valuable as any that appeared in my installations, waiting only for the right perspective to become visible.